Today I'm talking about choosing between corporate and litigation for your practice area. And this actually, I think, is an extremely important thing to talk about for every attorney. And you could actually make this a little broader. You could say choosing between transactional work and litigation practice areas, which is better for your career. And every attorney makes this choice at some point in their career. And then a lot of people later on are interested in switching practice areas. Also is not always the best idea once you start doing one of these. And I'm going to talk like a lot about this. And when I'm done, we can take questions, and as many questions as anyone has, I'm more than happy to answer. One of the things that I would offer related to this today is that when you ask questions, you can ask certainly about this or anything that you want related to this topic. But this is something that all attorneys and law students really struggle with. And they struggle with it for a lot of reasons. On the one hand, some people have a vision of litigation where they're going to be the star of the show and get to go into court and argue. And it's almost the opposite. You have to be very deferential to courts and clients and to be good at it. And then other people have the opinion that they're going to become corporate attorneys and get to work with important corporations and do all sorts of deals and that sort of thing. And the truth of the matter is, regardless of your background, you're going to be more suited to one or the other. And it's almost, I think the types of people that fit in, and I'll talk about this later on, but I just wanted to start with all this. The types of people that are good with corporate that are natural fits for corporate tend to be people that are more, in terms of their thinking and stuff, really seem to enjoy things like math, science, economics, like those sorts of disciplines get them excited. And talking about things like their problems or what characters are doing in novels or the history of different civilizations or anthropology isn't the kind of stuff that appeals to them. They're more interested in facts and information that they feel can be controlled, which is a good characteristic. Being able to control things is what companies need, and real estate and all sorts of different practice areas related to transactional work is controlling information. At the same time, people that like litigation tend not to be as interested in rules. They're interested in people and problems, and they're interested in sociology and English and history and things like that. And they like reading and arguing and thinking that way. And sometimes most of the time they like conflict. So the problem is most attorneys go into things for the wrong reasons. So a lot of times attorneys will go into litigation because they think that it's exciting or they want to do personal injury or who knows, but they go into it because it's the only job available. Most jobs out there, the highest percentage are litigation. And then a lot of people will go into corporate because they're more interested they think that there's more opportunities. They know more people are getting jobs in it. And that's true. And then the final point I want to make before I kind of whirl into the formal introduction is a lot of people will go into corporate because they've decided at the beginning of their careers or before they even get into a law firm or before their careers even start that they want to go in-house. And it definitely is easier to go in-house as a corporate attorney. And it's easier to get jobs in big cities like New York as a corporate attorney. And there's just a lot of benefits to being a corporate attorney. But if you're not suited to that practice area, you're not, the way I say, like a math and science type person or economic, then you may not do well. And that's just the problem. And the same thing with corporate attorneys going into litigation. They think all these problems and things that people are arguing about are stupid, and they often don't like the conflict and people enjoying making arguments against them and turning them on their head. So I'm going to go into the presentation now, but I did want to open up with that. This is a topic that I've personally struggled with, and I see attorneys struggle with all the time. And it's an important topic, and is going to have a major effect on your happiness and what happens to you in your career. A lot of people just, when they choose a practice area, and sometimes, most of the time, they don't even choose it, they just get put in that practice area. They don't give a lot of thought to a lot of times attorneys will choose litigation for the reasons I gave earlier. They think they enjoy writing and arguing. And some attorneys choose corporate because they like business and they want to maybe go into business. And I'm just going to tell you today the pros and cons of each and how it's going to impact your future employability. But keep in mind, the big thing is just in all this is your happiness. If you are a natural fit for something, you will do well. And if something comes to you naturally, you would do well. If you're not a natural fit for something and you have to, and then you won't do well. And a lot of people go into things that they're not natural fits for, and they're competing against people that are natural fits. You typically will be either a math and science type person or an English type person. And I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about that today, but there's so much research and things out there that show that by the time someone is in first or second grade, even that is written in stone, what their dominant type of thought patterns and the things that interest them the most. And you may be able to make yourself interested in corporate and math and science, get great grades and go to great colleges. But when it comes down to it, the types of things that you gravitate towards naturally are really going to be what you should be doing. And again, math and science type people typically will gravitate towards corporate naturally. Litigation people will gravitate to reading and writing and things naturally. And the reason I bring this up so much is just because it doesn't matter what practice area you do, but if you do something that you're going to be a natural fit for, you're going to go farther because you're going to be more interested in learning things, and it's going to be fun for you as opposed to you're watching the clock. Have you ever been in a job where you have to watch the clock? It's horrible. I have to watch the clock to stop working because I'm so excited about what I do because I know that I need to get sleep in order to be effective the next day. And I know I have to spend time with my family at night, but if you have to watch the clock because you're so bored and you leave at the same time, then you're not on the right practice area. So you just need to think about what interests you and where your main interests lie. And I can't emphasize that enough because regardless of what practice area you're in, if it's a bad fit for you, then that's bad. Now, I want to make one final point, and that's you could be unhappy in a job because you're in the wrong employer. And there's a whole separate discussion about that, which is finding your tribe and stuff, which is a webinar that I'll do in the near future. Okay, so corporate. So here are the positives of being a corporate attorney. When the economy is strong, the corporate is among the best areas out there. So at the time I'm recording this webinar, corporate is as good as it's ever been. If you're a corporate attorney, even if you're not at a large firm, you could probably get into a large firm in some city in the country if you have pretty decent experience. When corporate is strong, corporate attorneys can pretty much get jobs all over the country. There's just so much demand for them. But the more specialized ones, there tends to be even more demand. And you can move very easily between states and different regions, often without the bar. If you're a litigator at a major firm in Chicago and you want to move to Silicon Valley or Los Angeles, you're not going to get a very warm reception if you don't have the California bar. But even if you don't have the California bar, you will probably get a pretty warm reception in those areas right now. If you're at a 10-person firm, you're probably okay. So it's just the reason for that is that it's a very specialized practice area. It takes a lot of learning to do. You don't learn necessarily how to be a corporate attorney when you're in law school. And so that's a problem. And in litigation, the understanding local rules, local filing requirements, how things are done locally tends to be very important, but it's less important with corporate law. And corporate lawyers don't need to sign pleadings in local courts. And so you can they're happy many times to let you practice while you're trying to pass the bar. Yeah, so that's fine. An example would be the corporate market is almost at this level right now, but in the early 2000s, corporate was so active. I had things happening which just blew my mind. I saw at the very peak of it, I saw people like coming from 3-person law firms in small markets, suburbs, and things that had mainly corporate experience, but not always a lot of corporate experience and may not have gone to top law schools, getting moved across the country, interviewed in great firms in Silicon Valley, for example, or even New York, and firms renting them suites when they came out because it's just ridiculous stuff. And so it can get very active. And the reason is because corporate moves in cycles and it's just, that's how it works. And I remember during this period, lots of graduates of Pace Law School and other smaller law schools, even if they weren't at the top of their class, were getting hired by the most prestigious law firms in New York. And the top names, maybe not Wachtell and things or Sullivan Cromwell, but they were getting hired at most of the rest of them. So there was that much demand. And when the economy is strong, there's always a lot of demand for corporate attorneys. And unlike litigators, when there's a higher demand for litigators, for whatever reason, corporate is just, it gets very active. Now, the problem with corporate is When it gets very active, the people get jobs in-house, people start getting better job offers if they're at smaller to mid-sized firms, and it blows everyone away. So it's not uncommon for someone to come out of, say, a local law school in their market. So let's take a market like Los Angeles. You graduate from Loyola, which is a great law school, but it's certainly not UCLA or USC or Berkeley or Stanford or all these kind of other great law schools around here. And maybe they get a job in a 10-person law firm making $75,000 or $85,000 a year and get 1 or 2 years of experience. It's not uncommon for those people to walk in all of a sudden and get a job paying $200,000 or more per year. So imagine if you're a litigation attorney in one of these, you suddenly think, I really want to switch practice areas because there's so much demand. And that's what people try to do. Which is a whole separate thing that I'll discuss in a little bit, but it's extremely hard to switch practice areas by going to a new firm. You can certainly do it at your existing firm. But the thing is, when corporate is strong, it can definitely be ticket to work in a large law firm. Law firms, unlike litigation, don't care as much about where you went to school. I think that corporate clients don't really look at your schools as much, whereas when they're managing litigation, they do. It's very common if a law firm is pitching a client that's been sued or wants to sue someone, they say, these are all the people we have, and they were on this law review and did this clerkship and this order of the coif at this school. And where they don't really do that as much with corporate. It's just kind of like Simpson Thatcher, and we securitize auto leases, and people aren't as concerned about your background. So if you have experience doing corporate, it can be a very good opportunity, and you can move to better firms. Your law school pedigree becomes less important, almost unimportant, to be honest with you, to some extent. There's certainly always going to be snobby firms out there, but for the most part, you can get into the upper runs of the legal profession, even to some extent, regardless of how you did in law school. There's that much opportunity. You can move from small markets to large markets when the economy's good. There is a lot of opportunity if you're a corporate attorney. But if you're not cut out for that type of work, then it certainly can be tough. I personally would not like it. It's the kind of work that people like accountants would be good at, or people that enjoy sitting down and doing, puzzles for a long time. It's clerical type work in a lot of cases, and it can also be, but it's extremely difficult clerical work that requires an attorney to do it and requires a lot of detail and a certain way of thinking that can be tough. And there's some types of corporate law also that can give you a lot of employment security. There's certain types of securitization that are so specialized. You might be among just a few of the attorneys in the whole world that have that expertise, and could be securitizing Airbuses, double-decker Airbuses. Literally, there's probably an attorney that does nothing but that and that sort of thing. Securitizing leases of double-decker Airbuses. When I talk to attorneys in New York, I encounter ones that have extreme niche experience all the time. And they generally will get very specialized experience with large institutional clients and are generally very much in demand when they get senior, whether or not they want to work in-house or any of these niches can give you a lot of employment security. You can work many times in a niche your entire career. And those niches are so specialized that there's just very few people that do them. So when the jobs open up, you have the ability to move. They can actually be very good if you are specialized. And even general corporate attorneys are marketable as well. But that specialization can be helpful. The big thing that I would say about being a corporate attorney, though, that is very interesting is that you can easily, if you're a corporate attorney compared to litigation, build a huge book of business. You can start small and then you can go from there. But typically, most companies will have a corporate attorney that they call. That corporate attorney will do things like file corporate papers for them or help them with contracts or help them with buying companies or selling companies, or they may help them with, all sorts, anything you can imagine the corporate attorney would be called for. The companies, even small companies, are talking to corporate attorneys on an ongoing basis and have a very close relationship with them. So if you get one corporate client, which is pretty easy to do, all that an attorney needs to do as a corporate attorney is meet some people in business and give out their card and be there for some advice now, and then the person will start using them. And then you can develop huge books of business. It's not uncommon for people that are working in smaller to mid-sized markets where they're not working on huge clients to develop a multi-million-dollar book of business 3 or 4 years out of law school. It's just, you can definitely do it. And the companies are eager to have an attorney on their side that can help them with small matters. If you work for a mid-sized firm, you can always get clients fairly easily, or a small firm. And then larger clients may, want public companies and things, as their larger firms may want that. But for the most part, it's very easy. And compared to litigation, for example, and most of the people that I know that went into corporate law and stuck with it and worked and have books of business that are impressive, unless they get off track doing something wrong, or they go in house, or I don't know, a lot of things can happen. But this contact and these relationships are very interesting. I had not too long ago, I had dinner with a group of corporate attorneys, 6 or 7 of them at a restaurant, and every single one of them came to the dinner from a client meeting. So they're out meeting clients and talking to them about their matters and billing for that time all the time. It's a cool job, and you can definitely develop the large books of business and things compared to other things. And the thing is that when you're a corporate attorney, law firms love hiring corporate attorneys for that reason, because the other thing that also happens is those clients are constantly contacting the corporate attorneys about things like, if I have a real estate lease, so they'll contact the corporate attorney about that, and the corporate attorney will refer the matter to a real estate attorney. Or if the corporate attorney gets sued, they'll contact their attorney about the litigation matter, the tax matter, the IP matter, or whatever. So the corporate attorney becomes the contact and refers the work to all the other departments. So law firms love corporate attorneys. So that's one of the things, as you develop relationships with corporate attorneys, and they'll ask you for business advice. They'll ask you for advice about who to contact for different problems, and maybe outside. So the corporate attorney almost is selling access to the Rolodex. It's just, there's a lot of cool stuff that corporate attorneys do. And in contrast, if you're like a litigator, for example, it's much harder for litigators to develop clients, because they may only represent a client once. And that's when the client is sued. And then they go out and they contact people when they're sued, but they don't always get jobs. So one example would be, how do you get a job with a corporate attorney? I know a lot of firms, so you ask, that's a good question. First of all, you have to develop relationships with people and hope they get sued. But those people aren't going to be contacting you for ongoing advice, or they hope they want to sue someone, and so you can do that. But another way they get clients is one law firm that I used to work at would purchase these lists of companies that are being sued, and then they would call up the person being sued and the company and pitch them. And that's what all the new partners would do. And they would do that all day long, every day, and to try to get business. And it works. It's one way to get business, but it's not like you don't get necessarily it's something you have to build in to what you do. And corporate, as a general rule, because of that reason, have more business than litigators, but not always. Law firms, when they hire litigators, as I said earlier, they tend to be very concerned about things like law review, judicial clerkships, order the coif, the quality of the law school attended, and other things that make their resumes look good. And at the risk of upsetting a lot of people, I'll just make a couple quick points, because I've been doing this for so long, and I am a litigator, and I've done actually corporate too, but nothing like the litigation I've done. When a very smart litigator goes up against a litigator that's not as smart, the litigator that can argue better, that can intimidate better, that can think through problems better, that can interpret cases better, that can reach conclusions better, that can influence the judge better, wins. And that's the thorougest, that writes the best, that writes the crispest. And so these are all factors that could be measured. And if you are in law review, that's typically a sign that you got really good grades and know how to write well, or depending on the school. But if you've had a judicial clerkship, you were probably trained very well there. If you ordered the coif, you got the best grades. So you typically will understand things better than other people, or quicker, meaning you're more on your feet. If you went to a really good law school, that's a sign you probably worked hard when you were an undergraduate and then impressed professors and things to write you good recommendations. And if you worked at a better firm, you were able to get into a better firm. If you did well in your LSATs, and that shows aptitude. So these sorts of things will determine, in many cases, the quality of a litigator. I don't like it. I'm not saying that it's better but these are things that the best law firms are concerned with. But if a law firm's hiring corporate attorneys, the experience is really the most important criteria. That these things aren't as important. You can be very good at clerical related type work, which is corporate to some extent, not always, and I don't want to, but you can be very good at that type of work without having these type of smarts. Different people have different types of smarts, but it just doesn't matter as much for corporate attorneys. Law firms love corporate attorneys with good qualifications, but it doesn't matter. I've seen law firms refuse to hire people that run law review or didn't go to top law school or have a clerkship and all this stupid stuff. And I'm not saying this stuff's stupid. I'm just saying that they put up all these things for litigators that they don't care as much about for corporate attorneys. So that's just something to think about. If you're a litigator and you don't have these sorts of things, you're always going to be, to some extent, unless you take longer to catch on than others, you're always to some extent going to be, you have to take that as a sign that you're probably going to be beaten down by better attorneys a lot of the time and that have these sorts of skills. And I say that only a quarter century of experience in the legal profession and watching this and being a litigator and having hired litigators, very well credentialed and smart litigator with good social skills and personal skills goes up against someone that's not as smart. The person that's not as smart without those skills almost always loses. Not all the time, but they may have, if they have a much better case, like in personal injury and stuff, a personal injury attorney can generally, the fact is someone injured. That's all you're litigating. But if you have complicated fact patterns and commercial litigation and stuff, then the litigator with a better background almost always wins. And I'll tell you some stories about that later today, but that's just how it works. So that's why that stuff's important. So that's why I like corporate, because it's much easier to get a job. And in your qualifications, once you learn this stuff as a corporate attorney and you learn to be thorough and so forth, you can do very well. The other thing that's cool about in-house that people love is most in-house positions are for corporate attorneys, not litigators. And that's just the fact. Most companies need in-house corporate attorneys, but certainly smaller companies and mid-sized companies get sued much less often. It's much easier to get a job as a corporate attorney in-house. As a matter of fact, I've had situations where I recommended that an attorney that I know send their resume out to 100 companies, small to mid-sized companies, and basically advertising themselves as a corporate attorney. And they get 10 interviews, which is pretty freaking good considering the companies don't even have openings. So there's just a lot of demand for corporate attorneys in-house. If you know how to find a job, most corporate attorneys do not know how to find jobs in-house, do the wrong things, which is a whole separate thing, which I probably should do a webinar on how to find a job in-house, which I will. But that's something to think about. But it's much more difficult to get a job in-house as a litigator than a corporate attorney. And the thing is, most attorneys after a few years of practice, they don't like documenting all their time. They don't like the stress of a law firm. The quality of work required in the biggest law firms can be very stressful. The hours required can be stressful. So a lot of attorneys will always entertain the idea of going in-house. I don't think it's a good idea going in-house most of the time, but if you want to, then you're much better off doing so as a corporate attorney. And then most companies, if they have serious litigation, they don't want to do the litigation in-house because these kind of people that have these really good qualifications of representing them, and they can't necessarily attract the best litigators to their company with the types of salaries they want to pay, and they can't be assured that the work will be of the best quality, that there'll be people around to debate ideas, and the stress of having the litigation inside of the company while it's going on. Meaning, who wants to have your in-house attorney popping in your office if you're the CEO or telling you about discovery motions and things happening all the time? They don't want to be involved. The in-house litigation in most companies reviews legal bills, assists with small legal matters and so forth, whereas the corporate attorney is typically involved in day-to-day operations of the company, negotiating contracts, negotiating deals, talking to outside counsel. It's just a different type of advisory role where the corporate attorney learns all about the company and becomes an in-house advisor. And whereas the in-house attorney doing litigation is much more rare. It's common in insurance and it's common in other matters, but that's pretty much how it works. And then the other thing that makes corporate attorneys marketable is that there's just not a lot of them. You learn to be a litigator when you're in law school. And I've seen tons of litigators that have never been trained in a law firm. They just come out, start practicing on their own, and they often have very good careers with solo practices or even start law firms. So you don't necessarily need to be trained in a law firm to be a litigator. You're trained in law school, and all the stuff they do in law school, moot court and the learning and stuff is a lot of times related to that, but you don't necessarily learn how to be a corporate attorney. And if you look at a map and you do a search for almost any city in the United States, you're going to find people that have set up a shingle or law firms there or whatever. If I were to do a search for litigation law firms in Los Angeles on Google, the results I get, there'll be more of them or less of them the next day when I search. And there's just so many litigators. As a general rule, a corporate attorney are much rarer. There's just not a lot of them. And so that makes them much more marketable than a litigator. The thing that people like as well about being a corporate attorney is being involved in strategic decisions or running companies. So most companies really are relying on their corporate attorneys to help them make decisions related to running those companies. And they call the corporate attorney and they ask for advice about the major issues: going public, stock options, compensation for employees, mergers, going bankrupt, and all these different things that affect the company, and opening offices internationally, cutting corners and doing something that maybe is a little weird. They ask companies, corporate attorneys, all these things. And the best corporate attorneys really get a lot of satisfaction out of that because they are giving a lot of input to how companies run and how they work. And that's very exciting to a lot of companies, and they like that, and a lot of attorneys. And so there's a real sense of accomplishment, and they're talking to the CEO or the executives all the time. They're given a lot of power. In big companies, they can make millions of dollars a year as a general counsel, where they're monitoring everything. And some of them walk away with hundreds of millions of dollars when there's stock and stuff. So it can be a very good job. And in contrast, litigation attorneys really are dealing with disputes and people in the company doing stuff wrong. They're seeing the bad side of the companies. They're seeing the negatives, and they're dealing with a lot of toxic stuff. And because of that, they're almost not liked as much by the company, because then the only time they hear from them, litigation attorney, is when litigation attorney delivering bad news. Sometimes a litigation attorney is suing people too, but that's just kind of it. And then litigation attorneys often aren't as respected as the outside litigators. So that's just something to think about. Corporate attorneys also get a lot of business experience. They're being involved in all these corporate strategic decisions. And many times corporate attorneys become the CEO of companies. It's much more common to make a corporate attorney a CEO than it is to make a litigator the CEO inside of a company. I mean, corporate attorneys often do that because they're so close to the decision makers. And many of them also go in-house after they've been working inside of a company. So there's just a lot of going to business for themselves to start companies because they learn how these businesses work, and they see issues with things that they could fix and how to make the companies better. There's a lot of stuff that can happen with a corporate attorney. Now, obviously, being a corporate attorney is not a perfect job. And there are a lot of negatives to it, which I'm more than happy to share, and that you should be aware of. If what I've said made you excited about being a corporate attorney, you also need to realize that there's a lot of big problems with it. The first thing is, what happens is during economic booms, and the economy goes in cycles, that they used to say it was every 8 years. So if the economy is say it's doing very well right now, and it's been doing well for several years, the idea would be that at some point people overinvest, they get over exuberant, they make dumb investments, and the economy crashes. It happens all the time. Since I've been doing what I do, there was a crash in 2000, then there was another crash in 2008, then there was a crash in 2000 and 2001 and part of 2002. Then there was a crash in 2007, probably through, it was going on a while. To some extent, it was going on all the way to 2011, for at least from 2007 to 9. And then now the economy has been doing well and there'll be another crash. And that's just how it works. But you have crashes that happen and they move in cycles, and they happen for various reasons. And who knows what's going to cause each successive crash, but they typically go in crashes. And so what happens and this is actually very important to understand. From a business perspective, what happens is everybody gets very excited about investing and spending money on certain things, whether it's real estate or stocks, and then everyone throws money at it, and then the values of these things go up and they get higher and higher, and they're worth more than they should be. Smart investors like Warren Buffett and people like that sit on the sidelines, that everything crashes and goes down. And it never stays there forever, but then tons and tons of people lose money. And then the people that are very good at making money, like Warren Buffett, step in and buy much cheaper than they are. And then when they go up in value, they're gazillionaires. And that's just basically the cycle. And so that cycle happens. The problem is when the economy is very good, what happens? And that's pretty much how most people, a lot of people that become very wealthy, buying and selling companies and things, real estate, always have become rich. No one that's super rich would be interested in buying real estate right now, for example, or when the economy is doing well and the values are going up, they wait until things crash. But the idea is that when the economy is in bad shape, though, the corporate attorneys lose their jobs in numbers that would astonish you. It's beyond bad. And that's typically what always happens. the reason for this is that when the economy is doing well and there's all this exuberance, every person coming out of law school wants to go into corporate. Law firms want everyone coming out of law school to do corporate. Law firms bulk up and they hire laterally corporate people everywhere they can. And there's just a lot of demand. And then when all that demand goes away, which it always does, at 1 to 10 years usually, then it's not 1 to 10 years, but every 8 to 10 years. And the run's been a little bit longer this time, but it'll happen. Then you will lose your job if you're working for a company and if you're working for a law firm. Almost everybody loses their job. Some people keep their job, but it just gets really freaking bad. And if you haven't been through it, you won't believe it. I know people that have said stuff like, the California real estate market, this is something my father said, is, the California real estate market will always go up. And then basically lost my entire inheritance. It's just, what are you going to do? It's just when you believe it. So that's just what happens. So people get very excited and they think that the party is going to go on forever. And they don't really think, they don't plan, they don't want to process the idea that things will ever change, but they do. And in 2001, almost every law firm let go pretty much in late 2000, every person they possibly could in a corporate. And there weren't jobs for at least a couple of years. Nothing. Hardly anybody was getting hired. Everybody was losing their job. And there were huge layoffs. Same thing in 2007, 2008. New York was like freaking zombie land. It was just there were no jobs. Didn't matter, what your qualifications were. No one was hiring. And what happens when the economy gets in bad shape is companies stop doing deals. They don't hire outside corporate attorneys to help them with anything. They cut back on their money. Companies are going out of business. So they don't need people. They don't want to spend money. And then law firms won't hire corporate attorneys and they let them go. I've seen law firms rent outside offices to put their entire corporate class and saying, we want all our corporate attorneys to work in one building now, because they're just letting so many people go. They don't want them to affect. It's very hard to survive these and that. And it's hard to get a job in-house when that happens. And I don't mean the ultimate thing, but I mean that having witnessed that firsthand, it gets so bad. And I may have told this story before, but it gets so bad. I once hired a recruiter. I don't know if it was in 2008 or maybe it was 2000. And he saw all these people just coming into our company in droves looking for corporate jobs. And he was a very talented attorney from a top law firm. He was a recruiter, but he was at the top of his class at, USC, like number 1 or 2 or something. And he started, and within 60 days, he must have lost 40 or 50 pounds of weight. I was doing nothing, trying to send all these people out and work with them and get them interviews. And it was like the myth of Sisyphus. He was just rolling this rock up the hill. Nothing was happening. And because he was blown away by the qualifications of people. When you see people at the best firms with the top law schools, and all of them were getting laid off and losing their jobs, and he thought it was something that he could control. You can't control it. It's that bad. And he ended up pretty much going crazy because he thought he'd never failed at anything in his life. And he thought, why can't I get these people interviews? And I was like, you can. But he didn't understand it because he thought it was a question of something he was doing. And that's how bad it gets. It gets really bad. And I just need you to understand that if you're going to go into corporate, or if you're in corporate right now, you should always be working on a backup plan. I've seen it doesn't matter. Latham Watkins is a great firm. And as a matter of fact, they really do take care of their people. And I have nothing bad to say about that firm. I mean, I don't know why that name is in here, but when the economy goes sour, like if you were a corporate attorney and say you left Latham Watkins voluntarily, you would probably have a very hard time getting a job anywhere else, even if you went to a top 10 law school and that sort of thing. It's devastating. And it's really bad. These attorneys, when the economy goes bad, lots of things happen. They often move in with their parents. So imagine you're making $200,000+ a year, and all of a sudden you need to move in with your parents. You lose your house. I've seen them turn in their cars to the bank or get them repossessed. I've seen them file for bankruptcy. I see divorce. I see substance abuse. I saw one woman become a crystal meth. I could go I could talk about this forever, but it's really freaking scary, man. And that's what happens. And it doesn't matter what your qualifications are. You're almost better off if you're working in a smaller firm that's not paying a lot, but it's really bad. And I just need to warn you of that because there's always, in a good economy, a lot of overcapacity, and they will let people go. And the people that didn't have the best qualifications, by the way, are often first to go. So if you think you really struck, you went to a 4th-tier law school and somehow you're working at an Am Law 50 firm, and you think you've really made it, you'll be one of the first people to go many times. And unless you're like I don't know, that's just what I see. I'm not trying to be rude here, but that's what happens. And of course, if you have business, then you're safe. If you have, and you're able to hold on to your clients, if you have, the highest hours, you may be safe. If you have people supporting you may be safe, but it's scary. You have to really be on top of stuff. And I'm sorry to be so dramatic about this particular point. I really don't like being so dramatic. But I need to overemphasize that because it's really bad, and you need to be aware of that before you choose corporate, because you need to save money because things can go bad, and you need to have a backup plan. And if you think it can't happen to you, you're wrong. It's like dying. You don't think you're going to die or get hit by a bus or someone from your family is going to get in an auto accident today. And you don't think those things are going to happen, but these are the things that happen. You have to pretend like they won't, but in this particular instance, they actually will happen, and they do happen. And it's just how it happens. So you need to be prepared for that. The other thing about corporate is the hours can be very extreme. The work can be tedious. It often leads to burnout, and it can be beyond difficult sometimes. So when the economy is doing well, many corporate attorneys will work 16-hour days, 7 days a week. They'll do that for weeks or months on end. And then the work that the corporate attorneys do is often much more time sensitive than work that litigators do. If you're a company and you have to go on the stock exchange at a certain day and they need to have forms read, that's just how it works. And that stuff will be due at a certain time. So you need to have everything done by then. And this work can be very tedious and boring. And so it can lead to burnout. It's very difficult. Imagine doing a crossword puzzle. Crossword puzzle is not a good example. Imagine doing math problems for 18 hours and not being able to make a mistake. And if you make a mistake, the entire math equation goes down. But people get very burned out, and the work can be very difficult as a corporate attorney. And so that's something that you need to be aware of, and something I really would recommend just making sure you understand as you go into it. And because people do get very burned out as corporate attorneys and leave. And the other thing too is when you're doing things at a low level, you're not interfacing with the clients. You're just doing the kind of tedious, busy work. And so that makes it even more unpleasant for a lot of junior corporate attorneys, especially, or mid-levels and large law firms where you're not taking an active role and interfacing with clients. The work is also very male dominated. I don't know why that is, but it's traditionally been more male dominated. There's always been more men than women. Certainly that's changing, but that's just kind of how it is. So I've given you a lot of information about corporate. There's a lot of positives and negatives, but I think that you go into it understanding those and being aware. The only final point I would make is the same one I made in the beginning, that if you want litigation or corporate, just keep in mind the idea between people that are better at math and science and people that are better at reading and writing. If you're better at reading and writing, then if that comes naturally to you and you enjoy that more, you're probably more suited to do litigation. And you're going to go farther and have more options and stuff than you would if you did corporate, just because it's natural for you and you enjoy it. Because anything you're throwing yourself into, doing for a long period of time, is going to result in you being better at it. Okay, so the next practice area is litigation. So here's some positives of being a litigation attorney. As a litigator, you can generally stay employed in all economies. The nice thing that the reason litigators can stay employed is the first thing is when the economy gets bad, people start suing. And because they're worried, they think that someone ripped them off when the economy was good. And the breach of contract is 4 years in California, for example. So people remember things and will sue years later to try to recover the money they lost. Also, it doesn't cost anything in many cases to file a lawsuit because you can do things within a contingency fee and so forth. So it's unbalanced in that perspective. Big companies will always hire attorneys to help them when they're sued. And employees will sue, class actions, or groups of aggrieved consumers will sue. And so there's always lots of work, and it doesn't matter what the economy is. Most cases take years to play themselves out. And long cases will continue through a recession. So typically they'll start settling them to save legal fees during a recession, but they just keep going. So a lot of times what happens is during recessions, large law firms will rely more on the work coming in from the litigators than the work coming in from the corporate attorneys. And the corporate attorneys will often be suddenly dependent on the revenue of the litigators to get their salaries and so forth paid, or their draws with partners. And then the litigators will become resentful and leave and go to other firms where they think they can make more money and not have to support the corporate attorneys. And this is another kind of thing that's been playing itself out for a long time. But there are a lot more litigation jobs than corporate jobs. Like I said, regardless of where you live, you could probably, if you had you could probably you could apply almost every city in the country, you could find lots of litigators. You could go to almost any suburban neighborhood, middle-class suburban neighborhood, and probably within as far as you could with a baseball bat and a baseball, definitely probably hit a litigator's house if you wanted to, or throw a baseball in an apartment building, you're probably going to have multiple litigators. So there's just so many of them. You can apply to find a job anywhere as a litigator. There's so many jobs out there. There's people, and in this article that this is based on, there's just a ton. There was a picture of some people, some women that have a business suing people for biting dogs. I don't know, but there's just so many positions, and there's small firms, there's solo practitioners, there's large firms, there's just tons and tons of work. It's very easy to find jobs as a litigator if you know what you're doing. If I lived it doesn't really matter. Any city in the country, you can pretty much find a job as a litigator if you have the skills and you know how to look for one. If you're not finding one, then you're not looking correctly, because there's a lot of litigators that need help. There's also some really good jobs for litigators in the government. There's government offices all over the country hire people that have law degrees and litigation skills. Every city has litigators working for it pretty much in the country. Every city has judges that need litigators to help them, prosecutors, U.S. attorneys, people defending against lawsuits. And it's just lunacy how many litigation jobs there are. And those jobs exist in the economy regardless of what it is. And when the economy, if the different types of administrations come in that are taxing people more, then there's more litigation jobs. And for the government. It's just, you can get jobs for the government. You can get jobs in big cities and small cities. I lived in a city once when I was clerking in Bay City, and there were tons of litigation jobs there. I don't even know how many, but probably, if this is a small city and basically a beet farming town that used to be a place do lumber in the 1800s, and it also had the distinction of having more bars per capita than any city in the United States. But anyway, the point is that there's so many freaking opportunities for litigators that I could have gotten probably 20 jobs in that city as a litigator. I don't think I don't know how many people were there, but it's not a major city, and it's a very kind of small city, and it's like that in cities all over the country. So if you're a litigator, it doesn't matter where you went to law school. You can get a job with a small firm. You can get a job with the government, and you just need to know how to look. And so a lot of times you should work on your research skills, but you can find every city. An example would be if there are, and I don't know how many cities are, and I'm just going to use an example of a big state, which is Ohio. I'm guessing there's thousands of cities in Ohio. But if not that, if there's 1,000 cities and you search litigation attorneys or whatever in each of those cities, you're going to come up with a lot of places you could work. And litigators always have work. If you just apply to them and there's no jobs, many times they'll just bring you in because they need help. If you're a litigator, you can always get jobs. If you want to set up your own law firm, you can always set up your job as a litigator. You can do so as a solo practitioner. Everybody wants to sue somebody. Lots of people are getting sued. I'm not saying everybody wants to sue somebody, but everyone has different legal issues. There's solo practitioners all over. I once met a solo practitioner in Los Angeles that had managed to convince a bunch of very wealthy people to give him $10,000 retainers to guarantee that if they got sued, he would give them, I don't know, $50,000 a year in free legal services in a year. And he got over 100 people, which is $1 million, to give him that work. And typically was only working at 3 or 4 lawsuits at a time, and had so much time on his hands, he decided to become a financial advisor in addition to that. So there's all sorts of games. And he was actually from a big firm. I think he was from like Kay Scholler or something, and he figured this out. So you can do very well as a litigator, and he was a solo practitioner. You can be a solo practitioner. You can do work for people from all sorts of different backgrounds. You can establish a firm fairly easily. When I was considering leaving a large law firm, I took out an advertisement in back then the Yellow Pages, just advertising myself as a litigator. And within a month, because I just wanted to see what kind of response, I had enough work to keep me busy 40 hours a week, billing out at a couple $100 an hour, which was just lunacy. It's that easy. So you don't have to really, if you don't think it's easy, you're just not researching how to do it. And you need to do it. If you try to go out and advertise yourself as a corporate attorney, it's going to be very difficult to get jobs because many large companies are going to, our companies are going to be the ones that want corporate attorneys, and they're going to want someone either working for a law firm and their resources that they feel comfortable, or someone that's in-house. But I've seen countless attorneys set up their own practices that are litigators. I see attorneys all the time inside of law firms lose their job as litigators and then set up their own practices. And the ones that have a little bit are hungry, always build up, make more money, always, than they were making when they were in a law firm, even as a partner, making $300,000 or $400,000 a year or more. They always make more money if they're hungry and aggressive enough to go out. And most litigators can survive. The other thing about being a litigator that a lot of people don't consider, and I think this is, some people are motivated by different things. Some people are motivated by money. Some people are motivated by doing a good job. Some people are motivated by working with groups of people. Some people are motivated by being happy and content, having hours that match whatever. But if you want to make money, wow, litigators, you can make a lot of money. You can make hundreds of millions of dollars when you take cases on a contingency fee. And a lot of them do. And if you're smart, you can do it. I don't know anything about that, but there's people that do this and make more money than you can even believe. And that doesn't matter where they went to law school. It just matters being able to get the cases and do them efficiently. And I don't know, it's not something I understand, but I wrote a book about this, by the way, when I was in law school. And then I co-taught a class when I was in law school, a torts class, torts 2, with a professor there who's no longer alive. When I say co-taught, I didn't plan the syllabus or anything. He just had me, I don't know, there were maybe 20 classes, and I got to present at like 3 or 4 of them or something like that. So I didn't really co-teach it, but I talked about my book. And so point is, you can make a lot of money, and it can be a lot of fun, and people can do. So some of the negatives of being a litigation attorney are, and I've talked about this early, but if you do want to work in a large law firm, then your credentials will often hold you back for most of your career. Unless you are at the very top of your class from over to your law school, it's very difficult to work in large prestigious firms. Frankly, a lot of litigators wouldn't want to work in large prestigious firms, but if you do, then it could hold you back. And that's something, and as I said earlier, corporate attorney, you can typically, it's not as important. People don't really advertise clerkships and law schools and stuff as much, or if are concerned about it with corporate attorneys. They certainly want corporate attorneys that are motivated. It's just not as important. So that's something to think about. And it's not uncommon, by the way, to see corporate attorneys that have been at like 10 firms and keep getting hired by big firms, and even 10 firms in 12 years and that sort of thing. I don't know. But if you do that as a litigator, you're often not going to be hired. I think a lot of the reason for that is if you're a corporate attorney, you can just be plugged into certain work that's being done. And if you're a litigator, it's a little bit more intimate, and you have to get up to speed on cases and things. And then if you leave, then they don't like you. But corporate attorneys, you typically see starting at a firm and moving to more prestigious or equally prestigious positions. So they'll start off at a small firm and then move to a better firm and a better firm, or a small market and better market, a bigger market. But unfortunately with litigators, what you tend to see is they start off in a very prestigious firm and then move to less prestigious and less prestigious. I don't know why that is, but I think it's much more, there tends to be downward movement with litigators and upward movement with corporate attorneys. And that's a pattern that I'm just telling you that as someone that's I've looked at in terms of BCG over, I don't know, 600,000 or 700,000 resumes over the past several years. That should give you an idea of how many times I've seen that pattern. And the pattern's not always there, but it's my impressions. It's much more difficult, by the way, to get a job to get business as a litigator. As I said earlier, corporate attorneys are interacting with clients on a daily basis, and the clients are calling them with short questions that they can bill an hour here, there, and an hour there. And unfortunately, litigation attorneys don't always have that type of relationship with their clients. The corporate attorneys are involved in all sorts of things, and they can bring in different types of work. So if I'm your friend and I'm calling you, if I have a corporate attorney, I may call them and say, this company is willing to loan me this much money. Should our business this much money as a line of credit? What do you think about that? And then the corporate attorney would say, that's okay, but I know this contact that could do a much better job. Send me the agreement. And then they send the agreement, the corporate attorney will mark it up and say, I don't like this, let me negotiate it. And so they're talking to their attorneys about things like that all day, every day. And in contrast, the litigation attorney is only being brought in when there's litigation. And typically the corporate attorney will have a relationship with the business. So the business may call and say, oh, guess what? We just got this lawsuit from this company saying that we're violating their patent. I don't even know what to make of this. What should I do? And the corporate attorney will say, that's great. I'm going to put you in touch with in our IP litigation department and you can talk to them. So that's how a lot of litigation cases arrive inside of law firms, through corporate attorneys or other types of things, tax, real estate, everything. But the problem is litigators, you have to be able to get business in a different way. And it can be much more difficult. And obviously when you're inside a law firm, is if anybody that's been following my material, you really have to get business to have employment security. Litigators, it's much more difficult to go in-house. Most of the in-house positions are for corporate attorneys, IP attorneys that do patent, real estate, things like that. There's just not as many in-house positions for litigators. There are jobs in insurance companies. There are jobs for litigators in-house, but the problem is there's just not as many opportunities. The number of opportunities of comparable in terms of pay and things for litigators versus corporate attorneys is probably, I don't know what the number is. I'm not going to quote, but it's a fraction. There's much fewer. And so the companies that are sued, if you're sued for a serious problem, just to give you some idea how things work. So if you're like General Motors in Detroit and you're sued on a very serious matter, you might think, well, we'll just have our local law firm handle it. And there's a lot of very good law firms in Detroit, excellent ones, but that's not what happens. Not only will General Motors not handle the case internally because they wouldn't want their litigators involved, but what they'll do is they'll refer it, and they won't even probably refer the serious case to attorneys in Detroit. They'll send it to someone in New York or Los Angeles or something, like a big firm there. So most companies just don't want to do that kind of work in-house. And so it's just how it works. And they'll always want to get people that are experts and can help them because they feel like they're going to get better results. And it's probably right. And the other thing is the reason it's so difficult to get jobs in-house is most attorneys are litigators. They're everywhere. There's some, like I said, you go onto almost any middle-class street, I'm sure you can swing a baseball and in any suburban neighborhood and hit a litigator's house. They're everywhere. Every street I've ever lived on, there's been litigators. I'm just thinking back to the past several years. When I moved to LA, there was a litigator. They're everywhere. There's just so many of them. Law firms go to extraordinary lengths to hire and recruit the best corporate and patent attorneys and transactions I've even seen them offer them signing bonuses. And I've seen litigators, of course, coming out of clerkships and so forth, get signing bonuses, but I've never seen law firms give incredible incentives and so forth. Just most litigators, the way they do other practice areas. So that are transactional in nature. The other thing is it's very difficult to move from one state to another as a litigator. If you're at the top of your class from a great law school like Harvard and practice in a major firm, it's difficult to move unless you pass the bar exam where it's easy to wave into the bar there. It's just, as I said earlier, because those litigators need to sign pleadings, and corporate attorneys, by contrast, can move out of state. They can do all this stuff. And I've had instances where I had one girl that I remember lost her job at a firm, and I don't know, she's a corporate attorney somewhere in California. And she was like, well, I want to look at 15 different states. And I was like, that's no problem. And she got interviews in all 15 states, and she wasn't even working. It's generally much more difficult to get a job if you've lost a job, but she was a corporate attorney, and she didn't even have great law school. I think she it's a good law school, but it's not like the top. I think she went to Hastings, UC Hastings, which is ranked sometimes in the top 25, sometimes in the top 50. I don't know. But so it's just litigation attorneys. It's much harder. You would never see someone get that many interviews in that many different states. And so out-of-state firms are often very wary also because they just can't sign pleadings. Again, there's no reason for most law firms to hire litigators because they're just everywhere. There's the risk of hiring someone from out of state that may not stay or doesn't have local contacts or local judges or courts and stuff is generally just not worth it. As I'm wrapping this up, and I know this is a longer-ish presentation, but there's a lot to it. When you choose the practice area you want to, you have to think about what the risks are, and you have to think about how far you can go, and you have to think about what your long-term goals are. And I've certainly spent decades thinking about this, and I don't know what I think is a better choice, but my opinion, I could tell you 50 reasons you should choose corporate, 50 reasons you should choose litigation. But my biggest opinion is you should do whichever one comes naturally to you. I know that when I was in law school, or when I've been in college, or when I was young, and even when I can remember being in first or second grade, or maybe it was third grade, it doesn't matter, and having to write reports and how excited I would get about doing that. But then in contrast, if it was doing science homework and stuff, how little interest I would have in that, or math homework. So anything that was like that, I never really liked. And same thing when I got into law school, same thing when I was in college, anything that was, I would have to push myself to do other stuff. So some people though, if you give them corporate work, if they have to get together and build spreadsheets and things like that, or it's very exciting to them and throw themselves into that, and they become very motivated. So what is it that appeals to you? And whatever it is, you're going to do the best in. So if you listen to the things I'm saying about what your long-term career objectives are, then you'll do better. And these are things that I'll ask myself these questions too, because it's an important decision, or what happens to you. Okay, so I'm going to take a quick break and get some more coffee. And then when I come back, I'll take as many questions as you guys have about all this, or any other questions you have about your career. And then we'll wrap it up. But yeah, anything you're thinking personally about your search, or anything, I'd love to help you with today. Thank you. All right, so let's do questions. Questions are my favorite part of the week. So we'll get started. Let me just see here. I'll just pull up a Word doc here so I can put them up for everyone to see. Okay, share screen. Okay, so let me look at the first question. Okay, so yeah, if anybody has any questions related to, I'm happy to answer these questions, but related to today's presentation, I certainly would be interested in reviewing them. So let's start with the questions you guys have asked. So I'm a 3L at the top law school and have no job offers. What are some employment prospects I may not have heard of? Okay, so let me basically pause my screen again, because I'm going to look up some practice settings to show you some examples. Just pulling everything out. Sorry about those guys. Oh no, I don't need help. Thank you. I'm pulling up. I wanted to pull up for you guys some different practice settings I wanted to show you. And if I can find, I may not be able to find these, but I just see for a second. This is not it. All right, I'm going to go through these real quickly. One of the questions I think is a lot of people ask about what are the different practice settings you can work in? And that's the question. When they're saying no job offers, what are some employment prospects I may not have heard of? So the first one is law firms in all markets. So you have large, small markets. The next one would be government, and you have state, local, federal, or state. Well, I would go, just to be clear, you have federal, state, local, and then you even have in the United States tribal. You have judges, you have public interest, you have academic, you have international, you have U.S. territory, which are Guam, etc., which a lot of people don't think of. You have military, you have corporate, small large. You have solo practitioners, which is also a good choice. You have opening your own firm. You have some of them academic would be law schools and colleges, online schools. There's so many. You have public defenders, you have prosecutors, public defenders aren't necessarily government, but these are all sorts of offices. It can include prosecutors. You have volunteering if you want. There are so many freaking opportunities. You have starting your own business. There's just so many things. It doesn't matter if you went to a top law school or an average law school, but these are some of the things. You also have things like you can go into investment banking. You can pursue alternative careers. Another thing that I would say, and this is a point that what is something I would like to share with you. So a lot of times attorneys think, I went to law school and I really want to be an attorney. And I have people that have, in my family, I'm not bragging by any stretch of the imagination, but part of my family has been in this country since basically one of them was born on the Mayflower. It's not even, but I can trace back my family a long time. And most of them that became attorneys never practiced attorneys. They did things like worked in banking and things over the long run. The point I would make to you is what is smart and what is a good use of your skills. I was in an auto dealership this weekend and I was talking to the finance manager, And he told me that his son is 20 years old and making $300,000 a year selling cars 2 months in at a local Mercedes dealer. That's what he makes. And that most people in the dealership are making 2 to 400. Does that blow you away to think about that? It doesn't me, because I've heard this kind of stuff selling cars. You don't need an education to do that, but if you're an attorney, real estate, I know a guy in Malibu where I live, it's an attorney, makes $5 million and went to fourth-tier law school. So many times, if an attorney goes into things that don't necessarily involve practicing law, and if you're not getting bites from law firms, you're probably not searching correctly. But why would you stress yourself out if you want to make a good living trying to do something that is not necessarily smart for you to do? That's all I would say, about that. I think you need to be very careful about what you do if you don't necessarily want to practice law. But if you want to practice law, if you're not 100%, you're not getting jobs, because this is a good economy and there's nothing wrong with not being suited to work in a law firm. Frankly, I don't think I could. I've done it, but I don't know if it's something that I could do, and I teach it. So those who can't do teach and so forth, and I can do it, but those who don't want to do also teach. So the point is that you don't need to practice law, or if you do, then there's tons of places. I've probably missed places where you can practice law here. You can work, other things you can do are attorneys do very well in, are they get jobs in the Central Intelligence Agency, and that requires, or NSA, you can get jobs, or FBI. You have to have a master's degree, or, a lot of attorneys are FBI agents. You can get jobs in U.S. embassies. Well, I guess that would be Foreign Service. So there's all sorts of things you can do. So I don't think anybody that's worried about getting a job should really think about how difficult it is to get a job. You should really more so concentrate on what is it you want to do. If you want to make money, then maybe you don't want to practice law. If you are interested in helping people, maybe, I don't know, there's all sorts of things you could do. Okay, this next question is, what happens to a lawyer's reputation if they get out of school and lose 280K? Do they have to change career? Because no. You don't have to change careers if you lose too many cases. Everything's, unfortunately, the way the profession's set up is that would be a learning experience and you'll be fine. So keep in mind, you can move, you can do all sorts of things, but no, you're not going to, you won't, you may have a reputation as a bad attorney in your town, but most memories are short. You don't really need to worry too much about that if you lose too many cases right away. So, I'm not sharing my screen. I apologize. This actually is the answer to the previous thing here where I was saying I'm 3 out of the top law school, but have no job offer. So this is the information right here of the different places you could work. So I was typing this down and I apologize for not sharing that. I didn't realize I wasn't sharing. But my point is that anybody with a law degree can work in any of these places. And your big thing for your employment prospects would be looking in multiple areas of the country for these things. There's so many judges, they're in every town. So there's always judges you can work for. You can always work in U.S. territories. You could work in the military. There's tons of jobs. You could even start your own business, or you could be a solo, or you could start with a group of other attorneys. Okay. And then alternative careers are things like investment banking, the CIA. So that's that. And then in terms of what is smart, I believe that doing things like, if you want to make money, there's all sorts of jobs you can do where you can make a lot of money and you don't need your education. You do something where your education helps. So if you're an attorney and you have experience in law school and you've learned how to argue and so forth, then, or put together arguments and present things well and talk. I knew, again, I was talking to someone this weekend that said they knew their son was 20 years old. He's been selling cars for 2 months at a local Mercedes dealership. It's his first job. And he's making over $300K, or I guess that would be $25,000 a month. So this is the kind of opportunities there are. Another guy I know, someone went to a 4th-tier law school I hadn't even heard of, and making over $5 million a year. So there's all sorts of jobs. Okay. So a lot of these questions are not related, but that's okay. I'll answer them. If you have substantial experience in a certain industry, for example, construction, how would you suggest identifying firms, lawyers specifically in that area and pitching practical experience to potential employers? So you basically just do a search for construction attorneys or construction law firms on Google. So let me just show you this real quickly, because this whole thing is very easy and I don't really understand why people don't do it, but I'll just show you real quickly. Already just see here. Okay, so construction jobs, construction attorneys, construction law firms. Let's just do Memphis. No. Let's do some, let's say Las Vegas. So here's all these law firms that do construction law in Las Vegas. You can find them right here. Then you go to the website. It's an immigration attorney. I don't know why he calls himself an immigration attorney. That's probably not good, is it? But you would find these different law firms that do it. And then you would go here and what do they do? Business, construction, and contract law. You meet our team. Let's talk to Mr. Brock. And you would email him and say, Mr. Brock's not the guy that does it, but you would email Paul Cunningham, represents contractors. Mr. Cunningham, I have experience in construction law, blah, 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 and I'm in the industry. I want to work with you. So would you consider interviewing me? That's it. You can do this with all these firms, and there's just tons of them. You just pages and pages of them. Then there's a construction law section. You go there and you find people. So you just need to get creative. Look at all these people. Mr. Chair of the construction law section. I'm interested in, here's his email. Here's this person's email. So here's this person. So is there anybody, do you know of any opportunities and so forth? This is all you do. It's very simple to get a job. I don't really get why people are making a big deal out of it, but you just have to do the research. And this is the kind of stuff that we do for our candidates and blah, blah, blah. So oh my God. Sorry, these questions are the good questions. This former employment attorney can work in a company. You can work as an in-house employee company. You can do HR. You can do your own practice, sue people for employment violations. You can do all sorts of stuff. So there's all sorts of careers for former employment attorneys. It's very easy to go in-house, do that. It's very easy to transition to HR. There's tons of opportunities for former employment attorneys. You can also go back to a law firm. You can set up your own solo practice. Employment is a great one. And maybe that's one I should have mentioned in today's practice area that has some differences. Okay, this next question. I want to be a patent attorney, eventually work in-house for pharmaceutical biotechnology. How stable are these jobs compared to working in a law firm? Would it still be more difficult if I start out as an IP litigator? Okay, great question. So the point is, the answer to your question is if you start out as a IP litigator, that's going to be harder to get. There was a Supreme Court decision that makes it very much more difficult for people to sue as patent trolls. And so there's a lot fewer IP litigator jobs than there were several years ago. And it seems IP litigation it's a busy practice area, but it seems to be going down. One thing I would say about IP litigation is most patent attorneys want to get into patent litigation later because they can actually make more money, bill more. And so a lot of times people become a patent attorney first, and then they will work as a patent litigator later as they get closer to partnership and so forth. So that's how patent litigation works. But you can certainly start out as a patent litigator. It's just harder. If you want to work in-house for a pharmaceutical or biotechnology company, law firms are usually a much more stable place to work as a patent attorney than a company. The reason for that is because companies go out of business. Many times, if they hire a chief counsel in-house to work on patents with them, if that person leaves, then a new person will come in and fire the existing staff. So in-house jobs are notoriously unstable many times. And compared to law firms that have the work can be stable. The problem with the practice area you're talking about, which is pharmaceutical or biotech, that has not been as strong as the electrical and that practice area for IP. So it is much harder to get jobs as a patent attorney. There are certain centers of it, which are like Boston, Orange County, San Diego, the Bay Area, and a couple of them. And those are main ones. And there's pockets of activity for people that do biotech all over the country, but that's pretty much it. And it has something to do, by the way, with land for labs being cheaper behind runways. Someone explained it to me once. It doesn't make any sense the way I'm saying it now, but I guess there's a lot of small labs and stuff in different places because of that. But anyway, that's kind of how a patent works, and you're better off working in a law firm. The only other thing I would say in terms of the stability of law firms is law firms are becoming less stable places, at least large law firms for patent attorneys, because billing rates, most companies that are having patents done want them done as a flat fee. And so they will have companies or firms and stuff do them that charge less. And so those are often very small firms. Many times they're just individuals. I know lots of individuals that write patents on their own. and may even patent agents that have books of business that are like 1 to 2 million and just do everything on their own. So a lot of times people will do things, just give them to patent attorneys that they trust. So that's how I would talk about that. Okay, let's see. This is an interesting question, but I hope that helps for the patent stuff. Oh, currently interning at a law firm and hoping to get placed here, but I lied about having a qualification I don't have, and I'm currently pursuing it. How do I come clean with my prospective employers without losing credibility? Okay, intern at a law firm, but I lied about that. Okay, I don't know what that is. You may say you're getting an LLM, or you may say something, but if you lie to your employers, you pretty much have to come clean about that. A lot of times people one of the things I would say, and I don't know what you've done wrong, but I don't know how serious this is. If you said that you were a master of Word Perfect or something, or you knew how to run a certain program and now you feel like you don't have it and you lied, then I don't know. That's something you need to disclose if you can fix it. I don't know what the problem is, and that's fine. You pretty much need to tell the truth with people. And I don't know what that qualification is. But if it's a serious one, that would be that the employer would hire you for and hire you if you didn't have, then that's a problem. People need to be able to trust you if they're going to hire you. So trust is one of the most important things. And the problem with trust is I knew a guy that was literally going to be made partner in a law firm that week. They had already voted him in, and we're going to let him know on Friday we're going to tell him that he was a partner on Friday. And so on a Monday, and they'd had the meeting, I don't know, on a Saturday or something. I don't know what had happened. But anyway, he was supposed to send a letter to a client over the weekend. And so the partner asked him, did you send the letter on Monday? And he said yes. And then the partner, for whatever reason, went into the system to check if he'd done the letter the next day and saw that he didn't send the letter over the weekend, that he actually didn't create it until Monday, and then he sent it that day. And then backdated it or something. So the partner didn't like that. And they basically, not only did they not make him a partner, but they fired him and just made him leave because they were like, I don't trust you. Now, would every law firm react like that? No, but this was a big law firm. This was a big Am Law 100 law firm. And some people would look the other way when something like that happens, but they didn't. So that's kind of what happened there. So you have to realize that if you're dishonest, then people won't hire you. But for the most part, qualifications are probably 30% of getting hired, 35% of getting hired, 30%. And the other 70% are, do we like you? Feel comfortable. So, if your qualifications and whatever you wrote were something that wouldn't get you in the door, that's fine. But people want to hire people that they like. So I talk to people all the time that say, oh, well, it doesn't matter. You don't need to ask me these questions about my background and my family and stuff. And I'll say, yeah, the reason I need to ask you is basically that people want to know, want to be able to like you. And that's important. And think about who you would hire. Would you hire someone that you didn't like, or would you hire someone that you did? So just put yourself in the shoes of a law firm, by the way. If you're interviewing someone to take care of your children, and someone comes in and they look down and they're not very nice and they don't make eye contact with you and they're not friendly, but they say, oh, I've worked for these 10 big families and so forth. And then another person comes in and they've only worked for one family, but they're gregarious and nice and they make you comfortable and you trust them and you think they will be great. Then you're going to hire the other person without the best qualifications. That's just how law firms are. So don't think your qualifications are really that important. Okay. Those are pretty much, I'm just looking for jobs here. I'm just going to answer these questions here real quickly. This is a fast one. I'm trying to answer questions that are relevant. So you can largely be partner with more than one firm. Yes, of course you can. You can be probably not more than one large firm, but you can be a partner in multiple firms. But most law firms will require exclusively a partner in one firm, but you can definitely be a partner in more than one firm. Okay. Someone asked this question. It looks very similar to a question that was asked before, like a week ago, but I'll answer it. I just completed a summer associate position at a smaller firm working at litigation, a place to receive and accept an offer. However, I would still like to work at a large firm in a major market like New York City, which I was unable to land despite interviewing from top law school. Is Big Pack still available despite all being compared to a smaller law firm? Okay. Yeah. Big law is still available. I don't know what the ethics of it are and what the rules of NALP and so forth are, but you certainly, I don't know if there's anything stopping you from interviewing with firms if you've accepted an offer. Certainly, that's not something I would ever have our candidate. But is that ethical? I don't know. I don't know if that's the rules of NALP and so forth, and I'm not going to advise you one way or another. But certainly, if you did a good job at your firm and you've accepted an offer, I don't see any reason why you couldn't get a job in another firm. If you're doing litigation, one thing that would definitely probably get you a job at a better firm would be if you apply and take a clerkship for next year. I don't know if that's ethical, but if you did that, then my camera went out. Give me a second here. Sorry about that, guys. I don't know why that keeps happening, but you certainly could. Give me 1 second. Here we go. Camera. Looks like it's turning on, but strange. Okay, looks like my camera died, so I may have to end this. Well, hopefully it doesn't matter. But the point is that you can definitely get a job in a big law firm. And so the path I would recommend would either be do it now or do a good job at the smaller law firm you got a job for and apply to those firms later. But if you go to a top 10 law school and you work at a smaller firm, you can always get into a smaller law firm later. There's absolutely nothing that's stopping you from doing that. It's not going to be difficult at all. So I just keep working on this camera, and it's not something I would worry about. I think you can also apply to those firms now. It says I got to relaunch my camera or install an update. That's not okay. That's how I would recommend doing that to me. The other thing is that I would say is that it's people, like when they start at smaller firms, they think that they're never going to be able to get a job in here we go. This works. No. They think that they're never going to be able to get a job in a larger law firm again. And that's just not the case. That's what I would recommend. The other thing you could do too, that would be smart, is after a year, you could take a clerkship with a federal clerkship, federal district judge or an appellate judge. And then you can always get into a much bigger firm if you do it that way. And I actually did this. I had a job at a New York law firm, and I knew that they were going to want me to do nothing but corporate, which they did. And so I took a clerkship, and because of the clerkship, I was able to transition into litigation instead of doing corporate because I wanted to do litigation. It's a better fit for me. Okay, so that was a good question. But you can always get a job at another firm. I would just go to your smaller firm and work as hard as you freaking can and do the best job you can and see if it's the best path for you a couple of years from now. The big thing is if you're doing a good job at the smaller firm, you actually may have a lot more opportunities in the long run than you would in a larger firm too. So I would recommend sticking there. Let me just say here. Do law firms judge you for having worked on places like Best Buy and so forth? I love Best Buy. I think it's a lot of fun to look around there. Buy things, but no, they don't. If you're working in Best Buy after law school, they're going to wonder why. But if you're working like Tech Geek or whatever, Geek Squad as it was called, I don't know. But certainly the better the employer and doing something relevant to your practice area is important. But that's pretty much it. This is one thing. Okay, yeah. Someone said they can't see my screen page. I hope you can see my screen page. Let me just make sure. Oh, you can see it. Okay. Those are, I think, the big questions. Let me see. There's one other question here just about what kind of homework someone should do before appearing for an interview with a law firm. The big answer to that question is basically understand the type of work they do and then be able to talk about it intelligently. If you're interviewing for a law firm that does securities work, understand what securities work is and how they do it and what kind of clients they represent. So you can talk about it intelligently and then know what each attorney you're talking about does. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for all your questions today. And I appreciate everyone being here. And I will say that everybody that's on this meeting, it's very smart doing these meetings because you are learning a lot that other people don't understand. And just the stuff you learned about corporate and litigation today could change your life and career. I hope it helps. And the more you learn, the better. I'll tell you that personally, I take classes on an ongoing basis on all sorts of different things. And I'm glad that I have something to teach like this, but that would be my recommendation. And thank you again, everybody, for being on the call.